Welcome to All the Best, an interview series with UNL ORCA awardees, where UNL means University of Nebraska Lincoln, and ORCA is the Outstanding Research and Creativities Award, which is UNL's top award. In Gerda Lerner's book, Why History Matters, she explains the life stories give meaning to the present and the future because we identify what is important to us. And she says, our stories show how we are interconnected in a particular time and place. As for this interview series, ORCA awardees have experiences that reach back more than a half a century, which will give us a personal view of how the best research emerged from UNL. It is my pleasure to introduce today's interviewee, Emeritus Professor John Janovy, Jr. He was awarded the ORCA in 1998. After I provide a quick summary of his life and career, John will tell us about his time at UNL, starting with his award-winning research. John was born in Louisiana, but his family moved to Oklahoma, where he grew up in Tulsa and then Oklahoma City. Something in his youth must have sparked an interest in science because he earned 3 degrees from the University of Oklahoma in Norman: a Bachelor of Science in Math in 1959, a Master of Science in Zoology in 1962, and a doctoral degree in zoology in 1965. Next, he ventured 1,400 miles east to Rutgers University in New Brunswick, New Jersey, where he did postdoctoral work for about a year. Throughout his young adulthood from 1959 to 1966, he was in the U.S. Army Reserves. In 1966, he joined the University of Nebraska Lincoln as an assistant professor of zoology. He had a remarkable career as he rose through the ranks. One interesting fact is that he has written over 25 books about zoology and other topics. His first book was Keith County Journal, that was published in 1978. He retired in 2011 and is now writing novels, among other things. With that, I want to welcome John to the interview.
Oh, thank you, Mark. This is really an honor to be here. So,
Yep, great. First question. What was your impression about the UNL campus when you saw it for the first time, and what are your thoughts about the campus today?
well, that's a good question. The first time I actually saw this campus was when I came here, probably in 1957 or 58, as a varsity swimmer at OU, and I think it was maybe the Big Seven conference championships were here in the Coliseum pool. And it just looked like any other college campus. It was snowing, of course, in March. But other than that, but I think that when we showed up in 1966, it seemed like, to me, it was an urban campus compared really to OU and especially to Rutgers, where I'd been. But it looked like regular campus architecture to me. And the buildings, they were red brick. And yeah, I think the Sheldon Memorial Art Gallery was one of the big surprises here at the time.
So how about today? What do you think about the campus today?
That's a good question. A lot of the buildings I remember are gone, and there are new ones. The engineering complex is really pretty dramatic compared to what it was then. And then, of course, there is Innovation Campus, which was the fairgrounds for most of my time here in Lincoln. So, yeah. No, I think the capital construction on this campus has been substantial and impressive. Of course, now you have to maintain it.
Right.
And heat it.
All right, let's jump right into your award-winning research. Give us a sense of how it came about, what it actually is, and why it's important.
Well, those are good questions because I'm not sure which body of research the committee actually focused on. Had I been a stranger on that committee looking at my own record, I think the 15 years of work we did on trypanosomatid parasites from the mid-60s through the early 80s would be the focus and would be the most impressive, really, to a committee. That family of parasites causes tropical diseases of several different kinds, including those that infect humans and domestic animals. And that family also has a lot of related, these are one-cell parasites, flagellated cells. And that family also has a number of them that infect only insects, for example. So we ended up with maybe 30 different species and strains of those parasites, and we did a lot of cell biology work comparing species and strains, trying to discover how and why they were dependent on host cells and what the metabolic differences were between species that cause different clinical infections. And I think I had some very creative graduate students in the lab at the time, and they did some pretty dramatic research as far as they impressed me with it, at least. And I think one of them in particular was a young man named Pierre Daggett, who asked the question of whether or not the related forms in insects could actually adapt to life inside mammalian cells and mammals, because at the time, of course, the question is, where do these mammalian parasites come from? How did they evolve? And so that involved a couple of years of some of the most intense experimental infection work that I've ever witnessed. So yeah, all that was pretty good. I think once the regulatory climate got I'm not sure oppressive is the right word to use here, but it really was then. And as soon as the field station opened up, then I sort of ended that work on trypanosomatids and started becoming an ecologist again. So
the trypanosomes infect how many people around the world? Do you know a number?
No, and that's a good question. The leishmanial parasites are mainly pantropical, although some species have now been recorded in the southern United States, especially the Southwest. They're transmitted by insects, kissing bugs, and so forth. I don't know. The number's likely millions. I don't have a current figure on that. Yeah.
Sure. Did you ever figure out what causes the host specificity? I mean, can you describe it to us simply?
Simply. Well, among the factors that differ between species that cause different clinical infections, for example, in the ear as opposed to the liver, are their enzymes' susceptibility to temperature. And so, yeah, those that infect the cool spots of the body, at least the ones we were working on, had certain metabolic enzymes that were much more temperature sensitive than the ones that strains that came from the liver. So, and there is and there's what 2 or 3 centigrade degrees difference at least between your ear and your and your liver. So that was one of them, and there were some other things. So,
no, great stuff. And so let's talk about what are 2 of your early graduate students or postdocs or visiting artists? What were their projects and what happened in their careers?
Well, the one I just mentioned, Pierre Daggett, who did that work, he ended up as director of protists at the American Type Culture Collection. And then he's probably, he's in his 70s by now, easily. And he retired and took a number of other jobs. One of the I had, after the trypanosomatid leishmania days from the early 80s on, I had a number of really interesting graduate students. One of them was a young man named Richard Clopton, who studied parasites of beetles. And so it turns out that this group of parasites called gregorins infect arthropods and annelids, so they are the most diverse group of parasites on Earth. And one day I was in the lab and I got a phone call from from a gentleman who asked whether I'd be willing to write a chapter on these parasites for the new Atlas of Protozoa. I said, no, I can't do it, but I have a graduate student who might. So Rich took that on, and it simply made his career, and he is now one of the, if not the world expert on this group. He's a faculty member of all places at Peru State.
Oh, wow.
and that tells you that you can study the parasites of insects without a massive amount of overhead.
Right.
Yeah, and the other grad student that I remember well is one named Ben Henelt, who applied, and he wanted to work on host specificity in a group of parasites called the nematomorpha. These are worms that infect insects or arthropods. And so, knowing what I knew about that, I said, okay, Ben, we'll give you a semester to try to get a handle on how to do this. And if that doesn't happen, then we need to decide on another direction of research. So he solved a life cycle essentially in a semester, and blam, that introduced experimental work on this whole group, this whole phylum of invertebrates. And that work has been picked up and by a number of other labs and who are interested in invertebrates.
Wow. What was your most unexpected research finding, or were there many? And then did they take your lab in a new direction?
Well, I think the one that I just talked about, Ben's work was the most unexpected. I did not expect him to succeed in solving that life cycle, but he was pretty creative and imaginative and did it. Yeah. I had another graduate student, again in the ecological era, named Matthew Bullock, who did a comparative study on how worm parasites move through the environment. And he used frog lung flukes mainly as his work. And he introduced the concept, or at least he expanded and validated the whole concept of avenues and constraints, and what avenues for movement through an ecosystem and constraints on those movements, what the role of those avenues and constraints are in setting up potential evolutionary tracks. So yeah, and Matt ended up winning the American Society of Parasitologists highest awards. So.
Okay. That's great. And we talked the other day about your most cited papers, and I sent you the top two, and what were the key points made in those papers. And what I'm really trying to understand here is impact. And one way of measuring the way we measure impact is by citations.
Right. That they were, one of them was a little surprising, and I've actually pulled both of those papers out now from my files and took a look at them. I think the current paper, the Bill Current paper on Hennegaia exilis, parasite in catfish, was a remarkable electron microscope study with both scanning and transmission micrographs, and analyzing at the ultrastructural level the different sort of clinical forms of infections of this parasite in catfish. And of course, the catfish culture industry is pretty substantial. So I think the aquaculture folks probably picked up on this. And it was a relatively mysterious group of parasites at the time. Whirling disease in salmon and trout is caused by the same kind of parasite. Yeah. So that was one of them. And that's probably the reason for that one citation. The other paper, the species density distributions as null models, that's actually the result, that's the theoretical paper, which is a result of a lot of years of sort of Friday afternoon bar talk among the folks in the lab, and it deals with the multiple kind lottery. And I think that what it does is tell you how to go about determining whether species in a community actually interact with one another. And that whole analytical method is that we introduced, that whole analytical approach and the software in that, or the computer code in that paper allows you to build models that you can analyze human communities or economic units or all of this kind of stuff. So it's a broadly applicable multiple kind lottery theory. And my latest book, Life Lessons from a Parasite, has a whole chapter on the multiple kind lottery.
Oh, wow.
and the origin of that particular paper.
Oh, wow. All right. Well, that's really good. Do you recall any papers that you thought were good, but were not among these top two? I mean, what other ones do you think were really important?
Well, the ones that I really like are ones that are fun. Well, and they're really more recent, I think, than some of those others. The multiple kind lottery was mid-90s, and the current thing was, back in the 70s. So I had a student, a young woman named Jennifer Schwang, who did worked on parasites of beetles, and she asked the question, what happens to the parasites if you starve the beetles? And it was not, and it really, all of this kind of work with insect parasites involves careful handling and all this stuff. What she really showed was that you could turn the developmental cycle of those parasites on and off by what you fed the beetles. And that paper just got accepted instantly.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I had another graduate student named Jillian Detweiler, who will be president. She's been elected vice president of the American Society of Parasitologists. She's now a faculty member at the University of Manitoba.
Oh.
But she did a bunch of host specificity experimental work with related forms of beetles. And that, to my knowledge, is really the only host specificity experimental work involving a suite of 6 or 7 related hosts. And the fact that they're microscopic beetles makes it easy as opposed to rats, mice, and monkeys.
Yeah. Where do you get all your bugs?
Well, borrow them. Yeah, I got them from Flower in my stepmother's house.
Oh, wow.
Actually the post-harvest research operation at Kansas State University gave us, and we got a number of beetle species from them that we kept in culture in the lab.
Wow. Because I'm just thinking, right, we have a facility to grow mice and rabbits and stuff, but there's nobody in charge of the insects. I could not imagine.
Right, no. And I think one of the things that happened when the biological station opened was that immediately I began to see a lot of research opportunities that had some conceptual punch to them that did not require massive amounts of equipment and chemistry and and lab facilities, but really required patience, good dissecting instruments, a good microscope, a nice camera, and time.
And a bucket.
And a bucket.
Okay. Tell me about your editorships, patent applications, companies, books, all the complicated things that professionals do to communicate to other professionals.
Well, I've had one editorship. Yeah, former editor of the Journal of Parasitology noted that that journal was 100 years old a few years ago, and talked a bunch of people into contributing chapters to a book that would talk about ideas and accomplishments in various areas of parasitology over the past 100 years. And I ended up being the person who signed the contract on that book and became the editor. So I had essays from all kinds of people around the world and to chapters for that, including, for example, one of them on chemotherapy, the development of anti-parasitic drugs, helminths particularly. That was written by William Campbell, who ended up being a Nobel Prize winner for his role in the development of ivermectin. So, yeah, and Bill, I've known him personally. And when I hired, on that book, I hired a student helper named Talia Everding. And when Bill's chapter came in, the first thing I did was hand it to Talia and say, go through this and give it a first look. And then when the parasitology annual meetings were held up in Omaha, Talia got to meet the Nobel Prize winner. So this is an undergraduate who first handled the manuscript of a Nobel Prize winner.
Wow.
But as for the rest of the books, Foundations of Parasitology, I was a co-author on 5 editions of that. After a previous co-author died, then I was invited to become the second author on Foundations of Parasitology. So I did 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th, and I had half of that book, which was about 22 chapters. And so I can tell you that that involved, every one of those revisions involved maybe the reading of 20,000 abstracts, the reading of maybe 5,000 papers, and the inclusion of maybe 200 of those papers in the actual revision. And then, of course, during the 70s, the academic politics at the university was a little hot after the merger of departments into BioSci. And one day I said, I've had enough of this. I'm going to write the great American novel and leave. And the result was Keith County Journal, which really started a writing career. And after that, I had a literary agent, and I then just started devoting an hour a day to writing. And the result is a number of books later.
Great. So I do want to talk about Keith County Journal. How did that come about? I mean, it must be the experiment station.
Well, yeah, we were out at Ogallala at Cedar Point Biological Station, and I was, of course, I've painted pictures my whole life, and I was painting pictures of birds, and I took some of those. I was a member of the Lincoln Artists Guild, and we had a show out at Gateway, and I put up a bunch of those pictures, and the lady came by and bought one, said, you need to take these out to Nebraska land and see if they'll publish them. So I took them out to Nebraska land, and John Farrar was the editor. He said, yeah, we'll publish them, but you need to write a paragraph about each of them. So I wrote the paragraphs, and I gave him the stuff. And then once I got finished with those paragraphs, I thought, I could write a whole lot more about these birds. So that first chapter in Keith County Journal was the 2 wrens chapter. Oh. And after I got finished with that, then I just sat down, wrote down a whole list of chapter names and started in on them. So, yeah, Dick Buhar, now deceased, was a colleague, and he did the first serious edit on that book. And good editors they take the book that you have written and turn it into the book that should be written.
No, that sounds really fun. And obviously everything worked out really well on that one. Back in the 70s, I think it was, how were books promoted?
Well, quite different than they are today. I was in my office in Mantor Hall one day after Keith County Journal came out, and I got a phone call, and the woman introduced herself as someone from Time Magazine, and she said, "We're going to review Keith County Journal. We need a picture?" And I said, "Sure. Where can I send it?" And she said, "Just put it somewhere where we can find it." And so I had a black and white print that one of my students had taken, and I put it in an envelope and wrote Time Magazine on it and put it outside the door of 414 Mantor Hall, which is my office. And next day I came back, it was gone. And the next time I saw that picture, it was in Time Magazine.
Oh, wow. That is
So,
different.
yeah. So after that, the literary agents came calling, and so I've had a literary agent really since the late 70s.
Wow.
And they hassle you constantly about doing stuff, and they do it. And of course, publishers all have their marketing divisions, and so nowadays it's every conceivable way you can get your name and the title in front of the audience, you do it.
Yeah. So how long before you wrote back to Keith County?
Back in Keith County was a part of a 2-book deal. The second, my second book, it was really fiction, and that's Yellow Legs.
Oh.
And so once I got that book written, I sent it to my agent, and he submitted it to 3 or 4 different publishers, and they declined. And then I said, send it to someone who's smart. Send it to Norman Mailer's editor, because that first draft had been modeled more or less on Mailer's book of A Fire on the Moon. I don't know if you know that one.
No.
So he sent it to Norman Mailer's editor, I've forgotten the guy's name. And he said, cut the crap and keep the story. So I cut the book in half, and it was picked up immediately on a 2-book contract by St. Martin's. So Yellow Legs and Back in Keith County. And Back in Keith County, that came about. I was on a couple of committees of WHO, and I was spending almost a month in Switzerland and Geneva for 5 years. And it just, those times and dealing with scientists from around the world, those times kind of reminded me of how free we were intellectually in this country. Yeah. And so that book is really about intellectual freedom.
Oh. Wow. All right. That sounds really good. I was just talking to actually a book dealer in town in Lincoln here, and he likes Yellow Legs the best.
Oh, yeah. Well, there was a movie deal on Yellow Legs that I'm not supposed to talk about. I sort of signed a non-disclosure agreement, and but it ended up in a out-of-court settlement that the university received a check, and it went into the foundation, and that supported my research for several years.
Wow.
And it was a big lesson too, dealing with Hollywood attorneys.
Oh, wow. All right. Well, that's we could go on. You've written a lot of books, but what organizations funded your research, and how much did funding organizations change during your time?
Well, early on, we had money from the Armed Forces Epidemiological Board from the military, mainly because the diseases we were studying are important in terms of soldier health. And that's been demonstrated to be true with the engagements in the Middle East, and it will certainly be true in any engagement with Venezuela in the tropics. We had money from Armed Forces Epidemiological Board. We had money from WHO relative to culture techniques. We had money from NSF to explore the physiological relationship between the physiological factors promoting infectivity to host cells, that kind of stuff. And so it was adequate, but I can't say much about funding for the last 20, 25 years. Once Cedar Point opened and I knew I could do publishable research with my gasoline credit card and a microscope, I said, I can sell enough watercolor paintings to pay for yeah.
You're lucky you had that option. I'm just curious, does the armed forces still fund work in this area?
I don't know, and I haven't even explored it.
Because all that sort of stuff has changed a lot in my experience.
Yeah. Well, it would be foolhardy, in my view, to be a military unit or a commander of any kind and not be absolutely focused on soldier health.
Right. Oh, that's 100%. Feeding them. But my other question is there any way to get a vaccine for any of these parasites?
Not really, although one of the cutaneous forms called tropical ulcer leishmania tropica, if you get healed, it naturally heals up and you're pretty much immune after that. So that's the biggie. But I think the best way to avoid tropical disease is not get it.
All right. I think we touched on the technique and instruments that you used, but in your earlier work, cell biology and biochemistry, was it?
Yeah, we used what I would call lab standard stuff, spectrophotometers, radioisotope counters, Warburg respirometers, that kind of stuff, densitometers, just standard stuff, nothing really exotic. And that's kind of a lesson. It's not the equipment, it's what you do with it.
Yep. The next question is stating that science is cooperative and competitive. So I'd like to know whether your work was ever scooped or did someone else produce similar results at the same time?
Yeah.
It could be the same thing.
I would say our work has never really been scooped except in one truly noticeable case. And that gets back to the author of that first most cited paper that you mentioned. Yeah, Bill Current. And he was probably the most skilled electron microscopist that I've ever worked with. He was just superb. And he was doing a doctoral dissertation on what happens ultrastructurally when different kinds of these leishmanial parasites get phagocytized by macrophages. So that's, it's really a question of what happens to establish infection. And he was well along on his toward his doctorate and toward finishing that up when that whole study was published by a group from Rockefeller in the Journal of Protozoology. So about that time, when we were out at Cedar Point, I had saved a lot of fish gill material in glutaraldehyde because when Bill was in the lab, everything we thought might get into his hands, you put in glutaraldehyde. So I said, okay, Bill, here's something kind of interesting. And he started in on a comparative study at the ultrastructural level of these fish parasites. And in fact, the first scientific paper published from research at Cedar Point in a peer-reviewed journal was one of Bill's.
Oh,
yeah.
And now we know that was a very important paper.
Yeah. Well, that was really the second or third paper out of the stuff. Yeah, the first one involved a different fish. But Bill got a good job at Auburn in their aquaculture division, and then from there he went on to Eli Lilly, where he spent the rest of his career.
Was your published results ever contradicted, and how was it resolved?
I don't know if it was ever contradicted. If it was, it has not come to my attention.
Okay.
You know, we've certainly had things rejected for various reasons, like everybody does. So.
Yeah.
But
then a similar question, did you ever publish a correction to your work? And what was the reason?
No, we've never published a correction. We've published follow-up stuff, but it was really additional observations, instead of, it would be a question that came up during the time you were doing a particular project.
Yeah, research is always in play, right?
It's never, well, the general rule, and the metaphor, of course, is the island of understanding and the sea of ignorance. And the bigger the island gets, the bigger the coastline. So what scientists actually produce is questions.
Right. All right, I think we've hit the breadth of your research, but is there anything that we didn't cover before we go on to other career activities?
No, not that I can think of. I think that, of course, the students who worked in my lab, both undergrad and grads, are really responsible for a whole lot of that. I do have my name as first author on some papers, but most of my whole bibliography, I think, has student names as first authors.
And that, I think, has also changed over time. Collaborations have caused author order to be discussed a lot.
Right.
But back in the day, it was just whatever happened, right? Whoever.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of that depends on how sophisticated is the technology required to do that research. If you require a whole lot of technological cooperation that you can't fund, or you don't have the equipment, all that stuff, that's where that comes from.
Yeah. All right. Other career activities. Society activity. Which conferences did you attend regularly, and was there a meeting that was especially memorable?
Well, that's a good question. I became a parasitologist in 1962 when I took my first course, and that year actually went to the first national meeting of the American Society of Parasitologists, and heard some papers that influenced me greatly. And so I think I've been active in the American Society of Parasitologists my whole career, and I think I've only missed a couple of meetings since 1962. I've been on several committees, including the governing council. I've been secretary treasurer for 6 years. I've been vice president, president-elect, and president in 2014. So that's been my major, and I've watched my own students sort of, work their way through national organization. The Southwestern Association of Parasitologists was held traditionally at the Oklahoma Biological Station, where I took that course. And so we've gone down there partly as an excuse to visit with relatives, but also an excuse to get out of Nebraska in March or April. So I've been secretary treasurer of that one and president, and also the Rocky Mountain Conference, the regional society. I've been president of that one. So
how about sabbaticals? Did you take many sabbaticals? What did you do, and did it ever change your direction?
I did. First of all, I had a year off. After my first round as director of Cedar Point Biological Station, I talked the director of BioSci, who I've forgotten, it was either Ballinger, I think it was Royce Ballinger, or it may have been Jack Morris. I've forgotten which one it was. Talked him into giving me a semester. And by that time, I had earned a semester from time. So I got a whole year off, and I spent it simply doing some theoretical research, computer programming, writing books. I spent a whole lot of time working on specimens that students had collected at Cedar Point and remounting them in balsam permanent stuff. So I did a lot of sort of just fun, artsy making slides that are now, thousands of them are now in the museum.
Oh, wow. Sounds like a real fun year.
Yeah, I think when you have a year to just be an intellectual and do stuff, that really is sort of rejuvenating.
Mhm. Now we're going to go on to service. Which service contributions do you remember the most in the department, the university, the community, and nationally?
Well, that's a good question. I think locally, I was on the Nature Conservancy, the Nebraska Nature Conservancy. I was on their board for a number of years, including when they first started. So here in Nebraska, so that was really fun. I was involved in the Lincoln Artists Guild for a while. That was kind of fun and rewarding and interesting. Um, Other than that, university business, I was an assistant dean for 2 years in the early 70s. That was highly educational.
Mm.
I've been interim director of the museum twice, once in the middle 80s and once in the middle 90s, both times as a result of some faculty issues that that happens, and those were exceedingly educational and sort of high profile ones. Yeah, and I was director of the Cedar Point Biological Station from late 70s through mid 80s, and again through the early 90s for a total of 13 years. And in general, it's like running a hotel. In addition to whatever else you do, at the end of the summer, you say, no fires, no injury accidents. It was successful.
So how many people participate in the biological station every year?
Well, when I was there, it was usually about anywhere from 50 to 70 people on site, for really the whole summer. And that included students, faculty, TAs, visiting researchers. Yeah, so there's kitchen, and there's plumbing, and there's air conditioning. There's all of it. And fortunately, Brent Nickel, who was the first director the first 5 years, sort of pushed on the university to get some assistants. A station manager. In that position, we've been able to hire really good people in that regard.
And then how close is that to a town?
8 miles north of Ogallala.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you ever do anything in Ogallala?
Well, when we were out there all summer long, of course, we went shopping, bought a lot of stuff, sometimes go to breakfast at the truck stop, did a lot, patronize the local bar, all that stuff. Front Street. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk about teaching. What courses did you teach more often than others? And then what are your thoughts about the importance of those courses?
That's a good question. Looking back on all of my semesters there, I was in the large introductory classes almost every semester. I think I only missed 2 or 3. I know I missed 2. I think I missed 3 of those. And then I think the last 5 years of my career, I taught parasitology in the spring instead of the large, like Life 121. But I've been in 101 since 1966, and those large. And I really came to realize that two things. First of all, you can't tell what's inside a person by looking at the outside or how their name is spelled. You just can't. And that's the first thing a teacher learns. And the second thing you learn is that your most valuable resources for a university walk in the front door by the thousands. And so once students started asking me for letters of recommendation, which happened right away, then I started trying to find out who they were. Mm-hmm. And a bunch of them ended up in my lab, and and it was great fun. But I think, in my opinion, tenured faculty members need to be in the introductory courses, not necessarily all the time, but often enough to build a clientele for themselves and for the department. Mm-hmm. So those first courses are where you establish yourself as a role model, in which you legitimatize the subject, no matter what it is. It's important to learn biology and the vocabulary, but it's also important to learn history and chemistry and physics. That's where you become an educated citizen, capable of understanding what's going on around you.
So 101, what was the intended audience for that? And did you say it changed into 121?
Well, that's a good question. Bio 101 was simply an available required science option for anybody at the university.
Okay, so
yeah, and the second semester courses, which those like a zoology course, would attract the majors. Mm-hmm. And up until the mid 90s, so from the mid 60s, for those 30 years, the students who liked me in 101 would come on to 112, and those that didn't would not, so your clientele would sort of build. Mid 90s is when we changed all of that, and then there was the so-called unified curriculum in life sciences that is now Life 121 and 120 and 121, I guess it is. So 120 would be the equivalent of 101, but maybe without the evolution.
Okay.
And 121 would be the equivalent of one of the more organismically focused courses.
And so that's always taught by somebody who knows zoology, or is it open to all bio-sci faculty?
Well, those courses, 120 and 121, as far as I know, is open to anyone who wants to enroll. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, we're going to move on to your youth.
Okay.
Where did you grow up, and what was your childhood like?
My childhood was pretty wonderful. I grew up in Oklahoma City, and we lived on the sort of the edge of town. And so I had ready access to vacant lots and to the Oklahoma City Reservoir a few miles away on their bike. And, and you could ride your bike and go hunting, and so all of that stuff. And I did a lot of fishing and hunting and drawing pictures and reading books. That's mostly what I spent my childhood doing. My dad was a petroleum geologist, and so I got a lot of exposure to a little bit of exposure, at least a little bit of how do I describe this? A lot of exposure, but not as much depth as I probably should have asked him about.
Right.
But watching him work at night and listening to him talk on the phone, all that stuff, was very educational. And my mother was very much a reader, and she had not gone to college, but once she got her cancer diagnosis and her children left, she decided to go to college. So she went and studied English literature for a while until she passed. But so I grew up in a household that was not afraid of science, that talked about science all the time, and that sort of revered literature.
So your dad had a degree in petroleum geology. Where did he get that?
He got that at University of Oklahoma in 1935.
Oh, wow. All right. And that brought him down to Louisiana and then back to Oklahoma.
Yeah. Well, his first job, I think, was out in the Texas Panhandle with
Oh.
Skelly Oil Company. That was before I was born. And then he took a job with the Louisiana Land and Exploration Company in Louisiana. And from there, he went to Tulsa. He actually worked for the War Department in Tulsa during the war. And he was a critical occupation deferred because he was a geologist. You know, a tank goes nowhere without diesel.
Yeah.
So, and then he took a job with Tidewater Oil Company in Oklahoma City and eventually decided to go out on his own. So, as a consulting geologist.
You drawing these things from a young age, what got you started doing that?
Drawing art?
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Do you remember the first piece you drew?
My first publication was a picture of a Native American with a teepee and a fire that my mother sent to Children's Activities, a magazine, and they published kids' art. So that was when I was 7 years old.
Wow.
I don't know. They always, well, my dad did a lot of work at home, you know, and he had all of these what I call completion reports that he used to draw his underground formation maps. And so there was always this big stack of, you know, used paper. And I just picked it up and started drawing on it. And then my mother bought me some watercolor paints and I started trying to do that.
Fun. So when did you develop an interest in science and math? It seems pretty clear it's from your dad, but how did that work out? What really sparked your interest to major in math?
What sparked my interest in major in math was a really great math teacher after I got bored with civil engineering. And I decided to be a civil engineer because there was a guy who built his own house right across the street from us. And I watched him do it and went over there and he was a civil engineer. And I thought, well, I'd be a civil engineer. So that got boring and my most exciting faculty members were in math. And so I followed them. I was not a very good mathematician. I'm not going to show you my transcript, but I did get a degree. And I think more than anything else, I got a way of thinking about the world, you know, and so a kind of a quantitative and relationship thinking. Yeah.
So yeah, logical and quantitative.
Logical and quantitative.
Where did you go to school? We already said University of Oklahoma, but then you got that math degree, switched to zoology, and how did that happen as an undergrad?
Well, I took a course. One of my buddies on the swim team said, "Let's take ornithology," and this was the last year I was there, and so we visited with the prof, and he let us in. So my last semester of my 4 years as a college student, I took this course in ornithology, and that faculty member was George Sutton, a world-renowned ornithologist and artist, and he was doing all the stuff as a career that I had done as a kid. And so I said, I'm going to be like this. And I went in, you know, I was in ROTC. I did 6 months active duty in the Army and came back out and got into grad school on probation and eventually got my degrees.
So the value of teachers, right? And turning us on.
The value of teachers, yeah.
How did you choose the postdoc at Rutgers? That seems like a long way away.
Well, my doctoral work was on bird malaria. Okay. And my major advisor had a big grant, and the whole idea was to study the movement of parasites and viruses intercontinentally. And the main research area was in the middle of Kansas, the Cheyenne Bottoms. And so I spent 3 years really commuting from Norman to Great Bend, Kansas, and the demands of field work were such that I knew I could not continue to be that kind of a biologist and and stay, and have a family, which I had by then.
Mm.
So I started looking around and looked for labs that did experimental work in which you could actually control what you were doing, as opposed to letting mosquitoes control. Mosquitoes 300 miles away control what you were doing. So, Leslie Stauber at Rutgers was doing some really groundbreaking experimental infection work with this group of trypanosomatid parasites, the Leishmania, and most of that was in hamsters. And so, I thought, okay, let's do it. And so I wrote him and applied, and he had a big training grant at the time. And so we went to Rutgers.
Sounds like fun. What research and writing did you do to merit authorship on your very first paper?
That's a real good question. And somewhere I have, and I'm going to see about it. That first paper is observation on the size of the ciliate dileptus answer, and that was my master's, derived from my master's work. That's a 1962 paper in the Oklahoma Academy of Sciences, and this was a ciliated protozoan, and I was doing my master's thesis research was on the morphology of this protozoan under different dietary regimens. So how does diet impact structure in a one-celled animal? And that's where that came from.
Was your principal investigator also on there?
No, it was me. Well, my major advisor was Harley Brown, but I didn't have the courtesy to put him on there.
Oh.
And he was such a kind, gentle, dignified guy that he didn't care.
In retrospect, how far did your research as a professor diverge from your graduate and postdoctoral work?
Well, the first 15 years we were here, it was really an extension of my postdoctoral work. Yeah. At Rutgers, they had just obtained in the department a Gilson respirometer. And so, and my postdoc advisor said, nobody's used it. You want to use it? And so I said, sure, I can do that. And so that's where that first physiological paper came out from that. And then, so for the next, when I took the job at Nebraska, I needed to bring some of that research with me, and I needed experimental animals. So the first Christmas vacation, we went back to Oklahoma where our relatives were, and I trapped 3 or 4 cotton rats and brought them back and established a colony of cotton rats to kind of hold these parasites. And then I got the infected material from Rutgers, and that sort of gave us the stuff to work on for the next 15 years.
Oh, wow. We're going to go to the personal here, the last section. How about your family? Did you have a partner? We already heard you have a wife. How about children?
Well,
and then how did that all fit into your career?
Well, Karen and I met at a dorm dance at OU, and we just started going together, and we got engaged when I was in the Army, and got married a year or two later. And she had a job with the Oklahoma Academy of Sciences as a secretary, and so. And I ended up with a TA at OU for all of or an RA, either one. So we had an interesting married life and established some friends when we were at OU, and our first child was born in Norman. The bill, in cleaning out paper, I found the check that I'd written for her birth, $150, and gave it to her. So she's now retired. Our second child we had while we were at Rutgers, and the thing I remember, there was all this discussion about names, and our oldest one stayed in the hospital for 5 days until we could figure out a name to name her. And the second one we named, because we were so far away from family, we just named her the name that we thought we were going to name the first one, who did not turn out to fit that name after all. So that's how that came about. Mm-hmm. And so the thing I remember most about Jennifer's birth is 5 o'clock in the morning, going into the hospital. The staff member takes us to the elevator, and I have to sign the financial forms before she punches the elevator to take us to OB. And then our son, John III, was born here in Lincoln. Yeah, so. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And so all three of them grew up in Lincoln, basically.
Yeah, all three of them more or less grew up in Lincoln. Yeah. And they all went to East High. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Before retirement, what did you do for relaxation or entertainment?
Well, that's a good question. Personally, there were, I think for entertainment, I spent a lot of time playing the piano, even after we got here and bought a piano for our kids. I thought, I took lessons all up through high school, and so I spent time playing that and playing the guitar and reading. I've did lots and lots and lots of reading. Yeah, so I think down when I was on campus pretty much every day, I would at least during decent weather walk down to Bennett Martin Library. Mm-hmm. So I've spent a lot of time in the libraries.
Yeah, I love libraries. Since you've retired, how do you spend your time?
I would say I spend my time reading and writing and taking pictures. Yeah. My sister, who lives outside of Cleveland, talked me into joining her camera club, which is called the Chagrin Valley Camera Club. Chagrin Valley is a place near Cleveland where she lived. And so I did that 3 or 4 years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And there's a meeting of critiques every Monday morning, and she talked me into joining that group. So I deal with photography every Monday morning for 2 hours.
Remotely then?
Yeah, on Zoom. Yeah. And several of those, there's a group of about 15 that are hardcore, Photoshop, Lightroom users, that kind of stuff. And some of them have moved away, so everybody's on Zoom.
I see. And then how about your novels? How do they get started, and are you still writing them?
Well, I think once I figured out that I could write a book, then I just decided to start writing books about stuff that I thought was interesting ideas. And so that's where the fiction came about. And I think Yellowlegs, the whole idea, Yellowlegs is total fiction, even though it's really based on my doctoral research, mainly. And so every time I got an idea that I thought was novel level, I would start taking notes and writing a little bit of stuff. And sometimes those got into full books and sometimes they didn't. But in 2012, I was having coffee with another faculty member, Carl Reinhardt, and 3 or 4 of his students. And one of them said, I'm going to write a novel for National Novel Writing Month and pay for my education. And I said, what's National Novel Writing Month? And it was that sort of international online program that if you generated 50,000 word novel during the month of November, you could print yourself a graduation certificate. So I thought, well, if a grad student can do it, I can. So that first, so I started in on what I call now the Gideon Marshall Mystery Series. And Gideon Marshall himself is modeled more or less after my dad. And the first book was how do how do you murder a bullying boss and get away with it? And so, and that's, and the answer to that, of course, is generate enough workplace stress so that the guy self-destructs. So workplace stress is fairly familiar from the university. And so once that book got finished, then I thought, okay, I'm going to continue this story. So it's actually, right now, it's a 6-book essay on what I consider scientific literacy and illiteracy. And the main driving force in all of this is a multi-billionaire owner of an oil company in Texas who is determined to use fracking technology to build a weapon of mass destruction that can be used to generate earthquakes or volcanoes at chosen places in the world. So that's what this is all about.
Sounds like a James Bond film.
Yeah. But I think these books are much milder than James Bond. They would probably be classified as literary fiction.
All right. Thank you very much for talking to me. I've very much enjoyed hearing your stories.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks. It really is an honor to be on a podcast. So thank you very much.
All right. See you around.
Okay.